My name is Elizabeth Reiva, a master's student with the Land Resources and Environmental Sciences Department at Montana State University. Today, I will be presenting on biodigesters, a source of biofertilizer, their usefulness in the context of organic farming, and the work that I and others at Montana State University have been doing and are planning on doing with research on household biodigesters. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of how difficult the challenge of nutrient management is for organic farming, due to the requirements for organic certification. Since organic farmers are heavily restricted in the use of industrial fertilizers, it's common to see alternative practices such as the use of animal manure, green manure, and compost. I would like to add onto this list the strategy of using biofertilizer produced by biodigesters. First, what is a biodigester? A biodigester is a device that utilizes anaerobic microbes, or microbes that thrive in an oxygen-free environment, to process various wastes. These microbes digest plant and animal wastes within a sealed, oxygen-free environment and produce useful products such as biofertilizer and biogas. Biodigesters come in a range of designs that vary in price, size, and material. This ranges from units designed for individual households, the focus of our current research project at MSU, to large-scale units designed for farms, what organic farmers are likely to be interested in. Here in this image, you can see an example of a biodigester plant. Biodigesters are already commonly used outside of the United States, in Latin American, South American, and Asian countries. They are, however, increasingly being used within the U.S., particularly on the East Coast. Now, let's talk about what goes into a biodigester: the feedstock. Feedstock consists of three components: farm waste, inoculant, and water. First, the waste provides the food for the microbes. This can include food waste, lawn clippings, animal manure, etc. This is the source of the nutrients and gas that the microbes produce. Next, you have your inoculant. This is a substance rich in microbes that you use to introduce microbes and microbial activity into your system. This can include manure, fresh milk, or even effluent from an already functional biodigester. An inoculant should only need to be used once during the installation of the biodigester. Afterwards, the microbial community should be able to propagate itself. Finally, water helps create the necessary anaerobic environment by filling up the biodigester and pushing out the oxygen. It's also the medium in which the waste inoculant will sit, and the anaerobic digestion process will happen. Since we now know what goes into a biodigester, let's talk about what comes out of them. First, we have biogas, the reason for the dome top on this biodigester. Biogas is a mixture of carbon dioxide and methane released by microbes as part of the digestion process. Biogas can be used for heating, cooking, energy, and sale. The higher your methane content, the better the fuel will be. It is worth noting that biogas is generally used as needed and not stored. That requires specialized installation. Next, you have biofertilizer, the main output of interest for us. This is a liquid effluent produced by a biodigester. It is a mixture of microbes and nutrients that have been recycled from feedstock. Biofertilizers can serve as an alternative to industrial fertilizers, much in the same way animal manure and green manure can. Biofertilizer can be mixed with compost, applied to plant leaves or folially, or applied to soil. It improves soil health by not only providing nutrients, but also by enriching the microbial community of that soil. And worth noting is that excess biofertilizer can be sold. So what does a biodigester look like? Here's another example of a large-scale biodigester. And using the schematic, I'll talk you through the different components you'll find on a biodigester. These can vary between models, but in general, these are the components you're always going to see. First is the inlet, where you will add your feedstock and inoculant. Then you have your outlet, where the effluent exits the unit. This will be your biofertilizer. Here is the main holding tank where the biodigestion process takes place. It contains both the liquid effluent and the biogas. Some biodigesters will have an expansion chamber to increase capacity and help keep the pressure of the biogas from causing damage to the structure. And finally, here, you'll see the pipe that siphons off the biogas for whatever use you have in mind for it, whether that's heating your house or heating animal pens. What makes biodigesters useful for organic farming? As I previously mentioned, biodigesters can be a useful tool in nutrient management by producing biofertilizer, a wonderful alternative to industrial fertilizer. Now, because of how biodigesters work, digesting waste products, they can reduce the amount of waste a farm produces, converting that waste into useful outputs, biofertilizer and biogas. This not only decreases waste and the cost of dealing with that waste, and the cost of buying inputs, but increases a farm's sustainability, both in an environmental sense, improving soil health and water quality, and in a self-sufficiency sense, as the waste from your farm, instead of being thrown out, goes into creating inputs that you then use on your farm to improve production. Biodigesters are also useful because any excess outputs that you produce but don't need can be sold, providing another stream of revenue. So, how does one install a biodigester? The process varies between different models, but in general, these are the steps you'll be following. First, you'll need to select a site. You'll want one that is accessible and conveniently located for ease of transporting your feedstock and the outputs. Depending on what model you're installing, you'll also need to find a site that is shaded or sunny. Next, you'll need to prepare the site. This could involve clearing out the area, adding necessary infrastructure, or leveling out the surface. Then, you'll need to assemble the biodigester. How this will work will depend on the model. After the biodigester is built, you'll have to create the anaerobic environment in the biodigester. This will likely involve filling it with water in order to push the oxygen out of the system. Afterwards, you will need to add the inoculant in your first batch of feedstock and allow time for the microbes to propagate, essentially creating the microbial community that will be doing the work of anaerobic digestion for you. Now, after you have your biodigester installed and inoculated, using it is a fairly straightforward process. You collect your feedstock, your animal and food waste, lawn clippings, etc. You add it into the system after ensuring that the anaerobic environment has been created. Collect your feedstock, your food and animal waste, lawn clippings, what have you, and after making sure that you have successfully created an anaerobic environment, no leaks, no way for the oxygen to get in, you'll add it into the biodigester, allow it to digest. This might take a few weeks, depending on how warm it is, generally. And then collect the outputs as you require. This process should become a continuous cycle of production where you're always putting in your feedstock and taking out your outputs. Now, there are some limitations to consider. These include temperature. You'll need a minimum temperature of around 50 degrees Fahrenheit for the anaerobic digestion process to take place. So you will likely be unable to use biodigesters during the winter, at least in Montana. You will also need to ensure that your biodigester is completely sealed, as any leak could compromise the digestion process. And within the context of organic farming, it's also important to remember that if you plan on using this biofertilizer on your own organic crops, your options with feedstock will be limited in order to make sure that the biofertilizer meets your organic certification requirements. So if you have like a personal garden, that you do use industrial fertilizer on, you wouldn't be able to use scraps from that in your biofertilizer. Now, I would like to discuss MSU's Household Biodigester project. The goal for this project is to evaluate how well households can utilize biodigesters designed for use by individual households. These ones would be much smaller than what you would find on a farm, for obvious reasons. Now, the steps for this project include the selection of participating households, collecting food waste from these households, distributing biodigesters to these households, collecting the biofertilizer they produce, and testing that biofertilizer's effectiveness. So far, we have completed these first two steps. We completed the food waste collection this fall. Now, this spring, we plan on moving forward with the distribution and installation of biodigesters to households. At this point, this spring, we should also be starting biofertilizer collection and testing. For the household food waste portion of this research, we selected 12 households and divided them into 2 routes. These households were provided 5-gallon bucket each, and instructions on what food waste was acceptable for this project. Certain wastes were excluded: milk, meat, eggshells, etc. We collected these buckets every week and sorted them into different categories based on nutrient content, i.e., potassium-rich vegetables versus nitrogen-rich fruits. Here you can see Graceland at work sorting one of the household's food waste. As you can see, we would sort these by hand into the different categories based on nutrient content. We would then weigh each category and then add each household's contribution per category into different buckets for later processing. Now, weighing each household's contribution by category and then adding each category up, we were able to collect data to create this chart, which displays each category's contribution to the total food waste collected by percentage. As you can see, tubers, bulbs, carbon-rich vegetables were the most represented in our collection, followed by potassium-rich fruits, potassium-rich vegetables and fungi, coffee grounds, and nitrogen-rich vegetables. From this, we can make an educated guess that the biofertilizer produced by these households will be particularly rich in potassium, carbon, and nitrogen. This also gives us an insight into what the food waste coming out of these households looks like and what we can expect them to look like in the spring, which, as I mentioned, will contribute to what the biofertilizer will look like. Now, here are the 2 models of biodigesters we plan on using for this study. Which one a household receives will be based on how much food waste that they produced. On the left is a biodigester model designed by Dr. Roland Ebel and Dr. Jed Eberly. This biodigester has a lower capacity, so it will be given to households that did not produce as much food waste. On the right is a biodigester model produced by Home Biogas. This model has a larger capacity, and so will be distributed to households that produced a lot of waste. And these both serve as good examples of what household biodigesters can look like. As you can see, the Home Biogas model has a much more flexible frame made out of a sort of plastic, while the model produced by Dr. Ebel and Dr. Eberly is made more out of materials that you could find at your local hardware store, let's say. It's also worth noting that the Home Biogas model can collect and utilize biogas, while Dr. Ebel and Eberly's cannot. As a part of our preliminary feedstock experiments, where we plan to test different mixes of food waste produced by the households, we constructed our own home biogas biodigester. Here you can see Graceland and Dr. Ebel at work inoculating this biodigester. We faced a few issues during this process. One was a leak, which we had to plug, and the other was the fact that the weather simply got too cold too quickly for us to really get good output from the biodigester, though I'll note that it worked as well as we could have expected given the conditions. Feedstock experiments will hopefully continue this spring. This should help us better advise households on what kind of mixtures they should be adding to their biodigesters. Another issue we encountered was when we disassembled the biodigester. This model was clearly not designed to be easily dismantled once built, which can prove an issue in a climate like ours where you don't want a biodigester sitting out over the winter. All in all, we had a fruitful summer and fall this year and are looking forward to continuing our research this spring, which again will involve distributing biodigesters to households, helping them install it, getting those biodigesters up and running, and then collecting biofertilizer that they produce and testing it for its effectiveness, which we will do by applying it to greenhouse crops, likely lettuce, and seeing how it affects growth. Hopefully, we will have more data to show you at next year's MOA presentation on the effectiveness of this biofertilizer, which we are very excited about. I would like to thank you all for your time. Feel free to ask any questions you have either after this presentation or by email at a later time. You can reach me at this email, elizabeth.reiva@student.montana.edu, where I will answer to the best of my ability or refer you on to one of the others working on this project. I hope you enjoy the rest of this conference.